What's up, guys? Hope you guys are having a good day. I want you guys to picture this scenario. So imagine Elon Musk and SpaceX, they finally make it to Mars and they step foot onto the surface, the red planets. And all of a sudden they start getting angry and irritated with each other, and before long they're actually fighting. They're going to war against each other because they're standing upon the surface of Mars, the god of war, Aries, the red planet, which is associated with war and strife. So there was this ancient understanding, and the medievals believed this, that the planets actually biologically affect us, and that people and their passions are affected by the planets. If you think this is so crazy, then look at the moon. The moon shifts the tides using gravity, and the moon affects people on a biological level. That's where the word lunatic came from. You know, more people go to the hospital, or they go get in fights, or they go to prison on nights of full moons. And talk to any police, talk to any hospital worker, they will tell you this, that the moon biologically affects people. Solar flares also biologically affect people. I think people tend to get kind of scatterbrained. There's a whole range of symptoms. There's actually been a solar flare today and yesterday, August 1st, August 2nd, a medium-sized one, but there's all these solar flares that are affecting us on a biological level. So is it so crazy to believe that possibly the planets also somehow affect us? The medievals believed this, and I started thinking about this because I read Dante's Divine Comedy. And in Inferno, one of the top circles of hell, there is the circle of lust, and there's this couple who is basically being blown, the souls are being blown forever in torrential wind. And that is their punishment because they were fornicators, they were driven by their lust, and so they're blown around forever. And they said that, oh yes, we came under the influence of the planet Venus. So they literally believed back then that, Venus can arouse lust, and the various planets do affect us in that way. Another thing is, if you read 𝚑𝚘𝚢, which is the third book of the Divine Comedy, there are Dante is ascending through the different spheres of heaven, and it's also a geocentric model. Like, he starts on Earth, then he goes to the moon, then he goes to Mercury, then he gets to the sun is the third sphere, because they believed in the 7 classical planets. And the 7 classical planets are the planets that are visible to the naked eye. Uranus and Pluto and Neptune were not even discovered until like the 1800s, because you just physically can't see them. But the 7 classical planets are the moon, the sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. So there are these 7 planets. That is how the cosmology kind of was back then, a geocentric model. I think we are going to eventually move back towards that. That's my gut feeling, and I'll get to geocentrism later in this video. But read this article that I linked below. It's by the Magi. It's about the Magi, and Catholics did believe in astrology for a long time, and there are many saints, there are many popes that had court astrologers, and St. Thomas Aquinas believed in astrology. If you think about also the word enlightened, going back to Divine Comedy, if you are enlightened, like you are lighter, so you float. They had this kind of understanding that things take place because of buoyancy, where you can see oil and water separating out in a glass. But as things get lighter, then they are able to ascend higher. And so when the soul leaves the body, the soul, as it travels to heaven, it gets lighter and lighter until it reaches heaven. So at what point did people stop believing in astrology? And to be clear, there is 2 types of astrology that the medievals believed in. There's judicial astrology and natural astrology. So judicial astrology is believing that astrology and the planets can predict individual things, individual omens and fortunes. And that was actually condemned by Pope Sixtus VI in the 1500s. He wrote a papal bull condemning judicial astrology, because we believe in free will. Like, you might be affected by the planets, but you're not predestined because of the constellation you're born born under or because of a certain planet. Like you ultimately are, you may be predisposed to doing something, but ultimately you are making the choice. And then there's natural astrology, which is basically the belief that the weather, the agricultural patterns, and the biology and other things are affected by the celestial bodies. St. Thomas Aquinas wrote about natural astrology in that you can kind of use natural astrology as a way to look at large-scale events, not particulars, because he argues that most people are subject to their passions, and because most people are subject to their passions, which are determined somewhat by the planets, that means that you can kind of look at large-scale things and make predictions based off of that. For example, if there's some major Mars energy going on, then you could say that there's more likely to be a war that happens because of the large-scale Mars energy. So he believed clearly in natural astrology, and what's interesting is that people stopped believing in astrology it became astronomy at a certain point, but it became mainly because of Newton, Kepler, Copernicus, and Galileo. We switched to a geocentric model of the universe, and during that era, the Catholic Church basically clashed with Galileo, and most people switched from a geocentric model to a heliocentric model due to this. I am skeptical of Newton's theory of gravity, mainly because I watched this lecture by E. Michael Jones where he was directly talking about how Newton was influenced by the Greek pre-Socratic philosopher empedocles, who basically he influenced Plato and Aristotle, and he believed that the earth was composed of earth, fire, wind, and air, the four elements, and that there's also these two forces, love and strife, and that the interplay between love and strife shapes how these four elements interact. And E. Michael Jones breaks it down how gravity and Newton's three laws are influenced directly from these occultic principles. I mean, Newton was very into the occult, and he was an alchemist, and he was studying all this stuff. So he basically invented the theory of gravity. And so that's why people don't believe in natural astrology anymore, because according to our current model, there's nothing that would physically link the planets besides gravity to us. But there may be other ways of looking at it. The reason why I believe in geocentrism is because I watched Robert Sungenis. He is a Catholic scientist who made a documentary about geocentrism called The Principle. I'll link it down below. You should really watch it, and it really breaks down kind of the history of Copernicus, Kepler, Isaac Newton, and how it went all the way to Einstein and his theories of relativity, Michelson-Morley experiments, how they used to literally believe in the ether. You'll have to watch these videos to really see what I'm talking about. But essentially, a lot of the modern kind of cosmology is built out of occultism from the 1600s onward, when they were kind of rediscovering the works of antiquity and the pagan works of antiquity. So Jimmy Akin also had a solid video on astrology. He talks about the zodiac signs a little bit, how there is actual real scientific studies that were done according to the different signs, and there is actual correlation between what zodiac sign you are and kind of like your life personality. There is actual real correlation there, which is pretty crazy to think about. There is a bunch of zodiac signs in ancient Catholic churches in the Middle East. If you go in there, they have the zodiac in there. So we've kind of just lost touch with the natural world in that sense. You know, we have all this light pollution now, so we can't even really see the skies. But in the past, that was one of the main things, is that people were always studying the stars, the constellations, the planets, and trying to make predictions off of that. So that, you know, one thing that is important to think about is that God created the natural world. Satan did not create anything. The only thing that Satan can do really is to distort what is already there. So God did create the zodiac, God did create the planets, the cosmos, and a lot of the pagan knowledge, there's grains of truth there because they are like learning about the natural world. We're just disconnected from all that because we live in the modern world, the kind of the materialist world. But it's interesting to think about. I'm kind of a novice to this subject, so there's probably a lot of different things I don't know about still, but you may be affected by what is happening in the sky, the solar flares, the moon, and it's just good to kind of have some awareness of that and just realize that God created it ultimately, and we need to kind of rediscover this whole world, because I think there was a lot of good. I mean, there was also, they also would associate, you know, the pagans, they associate all the planets with their gods, you know, Aries, Venus, whatever. But there's also the medievals, they associated all the planets with angels. Like I was reading that Saint Michael is associated with the sun, for example. So there is kind of a Catholic interpretation of all this stuff. Again, we can't use it to interpret specifics, but we can look at broad strokes, essentially. So I hope you guys like this. Please subscribe if you haven't. Leave a comment, ask me a question if you'd like me to research a subject for a future video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.